Okay, so this week, Joseph rises to power. We're going to go over the verses this week first, and then I'm going to show you some evidence, some interesting stuff there. All right, so last time we left off, he was in prison.
And TV's not on.
It didn't? I wonder if it timed out or something, because I wasn't using it. Uh-oh. Come on. Okay, there we go. So, our memory verse, and we know that all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. And so far, Joseph has been falsely accused, sold by his brothers, put into prison. It's not looking good for him, yet in everything he does, God blesses him. He was, put over the prison even when he went into prison. And you think, well, does Joseph think that's a blessing? Because he's the one sitting in prison. Doesn't matter if he's over it, he's still in prison. And the thing is this goes from age 17 until age 30. So it's not like he's in prison for just like a year. So the time frame from him being sold by his brothers to the time he's vizier, second in command of Egypt, is a long time. Long time. Okay, so we're starting off in Genesis 41. Then it came to pass at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh had a dream. Now remember last week, he had interpreted the dreams of the 2 servants of Pharaoh. One meant this, one meant this. One was restored to power, one was going to be killed. So after 2 full years, Pharaoh had a dream, and behold, he stood by a river. Suddenly there came up out of the river 7 cows. Now here's the thing, do cows come up out of a river? No. Maybe a alligator or a crocodile or something, but not a cow. Fine looking and fat, and they fed in the meadow. Then behold, 7 other cows came up after them of the river, ugly and gaunt, and stood by the other cows on the bank of the river. And the ugly and gaunt cows ate up the 7 fine-looking and fat cows, so Pharaoh awoke. He slept and dreamed a second time, and suddenly 7 heads of grain came up on one stalk, plump and good. Then behold, 7 thin heads blighted by the east wind sprang up after them. And the 7 thin heads devoured the 7 plump and full heads. So Pharaoh awoke, and indeed it was a dream. So they're similar. You see the same thing kind of happening. One's just with cattle and one with like the harvest. Now it came to pass in the morning that his spirit was troubled, and he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all of its wise men. And Pharaoh told them his dream, but there was no one who could interpret them for Pharaoh. Then the chief butler spoke to Pharaoh, saying, I remember my faults this day, when Pharaoh was angry with his servants and put me in custody of the house of the captain of the guard, both me and the chief baker. We each had a dream one night, he and I. Each of us dreamed according to the interpretation of his own dream. Now there was a young Hebrew man with us there, a servant of the captain of the guard, and we told him, and he interpreted our dreams for us. To each man he interpreted according to his own dream. And it came to pass just as he interpreted for us, so it happened. He restored me to my office, and he hanged him. So what Joseph interpreted, it came about. And now is the time he's remembering it 2 years later. He's already been in office. And Joseph had told him, if you remember last week, he says, well, remember me when you go back to your position. Remember that I did this for you, that I'm in this position. And he didn't. So now all of a sudden, at this specific time, he remembers Joseph and what he could do. Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they brought him quickly out of the dungeon. And he shaved, changed his clothing, and he came to Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I have had a dream, and there is no one who can interpret it, but I have heard it said of you that you can understand a dream to interpret it. So Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, it is not me. That is key. It's not me who can do this. God will give Pharaoh an answer of peace. Y'all, this is unheard of. Because in Egypt at this time, they had a false god for everything. There was over 2,000 that they worshipped. You know, there was a god of the Nile, a god of the sky, a god of the dead, a god of they had frogs. They had a god of frogs for, it's crazy when you think about it. It really is. So then it says, then Pharaoh said to Joseph, behold, in my dream, I stood on the bank of the river. Suddenly 7 cows came up out of the river, fine looking and fat, and they fed in the meadow. Then behold, 7 other cows came up after them, poor and very ugly and gaunt, such ugliness as I have never seen in all the land of Egypt. Hey, so Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, it is not me. God will give Pharaoh an answer of peace. So that's twice. It's not me who's going to interpret this for you. It's God. Who's that sound like? There's only one other person that kind of says these same words. Does anybody remember? Daniel. He was a dreamer too. And he gets called along with all the magicians and wise men in Babylon. And he doesn't take credit for it. It's not me. This comes from God. And again, Babylon at that time is very pagan. They have a lot of false gods as well. So to come in before a Pharaoh and say, well, it's not your 2,000 gods, it's the one true God who's going to interpret this for you, that takes some guts.
It was the Pharaoh that also threw him in prison.
Yeah. And back then, when a Pharaoh died, they became like a god. They were worshipped as well. So that's another thing. So it says, then Pharaoh said to Joseph, behold, in my dream I stood on the bank of the river. Oh, I've already read this, haven't I? Sorry. And the gaunt and ugly cows ate up the first 7, the fat cows. And when they had eaten them up, no one would have known that they had eaten them, for they were just as ugly as at the beginning. So I awoke. Also I saw in my dream, and suddenly 7 heads came from one stalk, full and good. Then behold, 7 heads, withered thin and blighted by the east wind, sprang up after them. And the thin heads devoured the 7 good heads. So I told this to the magicians, but there was no one who could explain it to me. Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, the dreams of Pharaoh are one. It means they mean the same thing. And we can see that just in the numbers and what's happening with them. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. And back then, all the false gods in Egypt had a name. So if he would have said Ra or Set or one of those, that would have meant something totally different, but he doesn't say that. He's talking about God, capital G there. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good heads are the 7 years. The dreams are 1. And the 7 thin and ugly cows which came after them are 7 years, and the 7 empty heads blighted by the east wind are 7 years of famine. This is the thing which I have spoken to Pharaoh. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. Indeed, 7 years of great plenty will come throughout all the land of Egypt. But after them 7 years of famine will arise, and all the plenty will be forgotten in the land of Egypt. And the famine will deplete the land. So the plenty will not be known in the land because of the famine following, for it will be very severe. And y'all, this happens, let's just talk about it on a spiritual level here. Because are we more likely to remember the good that happens to us or the bad? The bad. We remember what people have done to us rather than what they did for us. It's just how we are in human nature. So even after the 7 good years, people are going to immediately forget that because 7 bad years are coming, you know? And the dream was repeated to Pharaoh twice because the thing is established by God. And we see that in Scripture. Especially with meaningful prophecies and things, in a dream, God does it twice, just so he's confirming it. This is going to happen. And God will surely bring it to pass. Now therefore let Pharaoh select a discerning and wise man, set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh do this, and let him appoint officers to the land to collect 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt in the 7 plentiful years. It's amazing that Joseph already has a plan just like that. That had to come from God too, in God's wisdom. Let them gather all the food of those good years that are coming and store up grain under the authority of the Pharaoh, and let them keep food in the cities. Then that food shall be as a reserve for all the land for the 7 years of famine, which shall be in the land of Egypt, that the land may not perish during the famine. This is a smart move. This is the only way it's going to work, is if you store up something. So the advice was good in the eyes of the Pharaoh and in the eyes of all of his servants. And Pharaoh said to his servants, "Can we find such a one as this, a man whom is the Spirit of God?" Again, that's a big statement, because remember all the false gods that they have. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Inasmuch as God has shown you all of this, there is no one as discerning and wise as you."
So Joseph's like, "Hello.
Yeah.
I'm here.
And you've had me in a prison. So you shall be over my house, and all of my people shall be ruled according to your word. Only in regard to the throne will I be greater than you." So Joseph, in his own house, he was the most loved son of Israel, right? He gets sold into slavery, goes into Potiphar's house. Potiphar puts him in charge of his whole house. All right, he gets falsely accused. He goes into prison. He gets put in charge of the prison. Now he goes before Pharaoh, and he's getting put in charge of the entire kingdom of Egypt. This is a big deal back then. This is probably the biggest kingdom of its day, rivaling those in Assyria. I mean, they had the education of the day. We're going to see that when we get into Moses. It's not some, I guess, unintelligent people group. They were very well advanced for the time period. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, "See, I have set you over all the land of Egypt." Then Pharaoh took his signet ring off of his hand and put it on Joseph's hand. Very important there. If you've got the signet ring, that means you can make a decision like you are the Pharaoh. You do it in his name. And he clothed him in garments of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. That's stating his authority. And he had him ride in the second chariot which he had. And they cried out before him, "Bow the knee." This is a guy that just came from prison. They change his clothes and clean him up. And now he's riding in the chariot and everybody's got to bow the knee to him. That's a big jump. Big jump. So he set him over all the land of Egypt. Pharaoh also said to Joseph, "I am Pharaoh, and without your consent no man may lift his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt." That showed the power that he had at that time. And Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zaphnath-Paneah, and he gave him as a wife Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On. So Joseph went out over all the land of Egypt. Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh and went throughout all the land of Egypt. And I mentioned to y'all last week that 30 is a number to focus on, because Joseph is 30 when he is vizier of Egypt. You couldn't serve the Lord as a Levite until you were 30. Jesus is 30 when he starts his ministry. David is 30 when he starts to reign as king. So it's a significant number as well. It says, "Now in the 7 plentiful years the ground brought forth abundantly. So he gathered all the food of the 7 years which were in the land of Egypt and laid up the food in the cities." That's key. I'm going to show you something in a minute why that's key. He laid up in every city the food of the fields which surrounded them. Now, that's going to be towards the north, because a lot of the south, if it's not right near the river, it's more of a desert. You got to be right near the Nile River or up near the delta at the northern side. So it says, Joseph gathered very much grain as the sand of the sea until he stopped counting, for it was immeasurable. Who did that? God. Only God could make the grain immeasurable, because he knew what he was about to do, and there was fixing to be 7 years of famine. And to Joseph were born 2 sons before the years of famine came, whom Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On, bore to him. And Joseph called the name of his firstborn Manasseh, for God has made me forget all my toil and all my father's house. That's the meaning of that name. That's what Manasseh means. And the name of the second he called Ephraim, for God has caused me to be fruitful in the land of my affliction. That's I guess I'd say a heavy name. Like you're the son and for the God has caused me to be fruitful in the name of my affliction. But it's
Both
true.
of them are. The fact that he was able to forgive his brothers too and move on and say that part of his life was pretty much gone, that he had made acceptance with that it was done.
Leaving as the favored son to be put in a pit, sold into slavery, put into prison, and 13 years of your life is ruined because of your brothers. I'm just going to be honest. It would be hard to forgive and move past that. Or you might even forgive, but could you really move past it? I don't think you're going to forget it.
I don't think you're going to forget, but him in the position that he is now. Well, how old was Joseph when he died? So he's 30. He has 70, 60, 70, 80 years.
Yeah. But
so 30 is minuscule compared to how long they live,
Mm-hmm.
We think 30 is almost midlife, maybe, not quite.
hush your mouth.
Well,
Don't tell me 30 is midlife.
well, I was going to say, what's average?
Yeah, it's in the 70s. Yeah.
Mid-70s.
35, yeah.
Yeah, so 35's.
I don't want to talk about it.
Me neither, girl.
But
Yeah.
for him to have this outlook though of I'm going to forget all that I've been through.
Yeah.
He had to see and have that faith. God is in control. There was a reason for this. There was a purpose for this. And we know, he's going to say that a little bit later on. But while you're in it, that would be the hard part. Because, again, we want somebody to blame.
But don't we do the same thing?
Oh, yeah.
Go through bad, we can look back and say, well, I see how God worked that out.
Yeah.
I didn't pray for that, but that
Yeah.
worked out a little better than I had anticipated.
Yeah. Yep.
So,
And it says, then the 7 years of plenty which were in the land of Egypt ended, and the 7 years of famine began to come, and Joseph had said, the famine was in all the land, but in all the land of Egypt there was bread. So when all the land of Egypt was famished, and the people cried to Pharaoh for bread, then Pharaoh said to all the Egyptians, go to Joseph. Whatever he says to you, you do. The famine was over the face of the earth, and Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold to the Egyptians. The famine became severe in the land of Egypt, so all the countries came to Joseph in Egypt to buy grain, because the famine was severe in all the lands. So this is a map, and what I want you to pay attention to, all right, so this is the northern side where the delta is. This would be the Goshen area. Y'all see that? I'm probably in the way. This is the Nile River that comes down. But I want you to pay attention to this little dot and those little track marks right there. All right? That's this. It's the Bahar Yosef. It's still called that today, and that translates as the waterway of Joseph.
that's beautiful.
It is. It is. So this is the thing. It says there are two notable structures that are still in existence that have been attributed to Joseph from the Bible. One is the canal called the Bahar Yosef. The other is the granaries where he's going to store the grain. All right, all these years of plenty. All right, it says the waterway connects the Nile with the Fayum Oasis in Egypt. This canal is believed to have been a feat of engineering by Joseph, the son of Jacob. It is commonly said to have been built during the reign of Pharaoh Amenemhet III, and today it's still called this. And we're going to talk about that Pharaoh when we get into the Exodus, because that Pharaoh is going to be important. But it's just amazing that it's still there today. And that's going to be like, so if there's famine and the Nile, let's just say there's problems with the Nile, you're still going to have a reservoir of water in this canal. Okay. So these are the granaries. Let me see if I can zoom in. Can y'all see that?
Mm-hmm.
And that just goes down, down, down. How much grain could you get in there? A lot. And these are all over that northern region where Joseph, you remember the house that I showed y'all last week? That had the 12 tombs and the 12 columns that they believe was Joseph's house. These are up there in those areas. And they're called store cities. So in these cities that are around there, they would have taken the grain, put them in the cities. And that's exactly what we see is happening.
I was thinking of a granary, like a silo.
Yeah, like a silo.
That's
yeah.
what I was thinking. They were just silos.
Well, instead of going up, they're going down.
That's way.
That's pretty cool because then they can reach even the bottom stuff. I mean,
that's way.
Here's another one.
Deep.
So there's lots of them. This is near the step pyramid. We're going to talk about the step pyramid when we get into Exodus 2, so keep that in mind.
It really makes sense, though. I mean, I don't know why we think about stuff like this, but, back in the day, they were making, a lot of stuff was underground.
Well, and
for a lot of reasons,
too,
So
it would have baked, probably, in Egypt if it was up above the ground.
Yeah, so down under the ground.
It makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
Okay, so now, here's another one. There's something called the Brooklyn Papyrus from the Middle Kingdom that mentions the household of slaves and stewards. Both positions are held by Joseph in Potiphar's house. So it proves also that there were those positions, again, aligning with the Bible.
Okay, I've got to ask a question because I assumed something earlier and I'm not sure that it's right.
Okay.
Potiphar's, he put Joseph into prison.
Mm-hmm.
That is not the same as the Pharaoh.
That's correct.
They're two different people?
Yeah.
Yes.
Gotcha. I assumed that the butler that they met, I assumed that those people were from the same house as Joseph was.
No, they were from the Pharaoh's house. And then Joseph was from Potiphar's house. But it's called the Pharaoh's prison, I guess you would say. I guess any upper, I don't know, crest official or whatever had the right to put
I gotcha.
people in there.
I just assumed it was the same person. Okay.
No, not the same person. Okay, so this one is amazing. Can y'all read the Egyptian?
Not as well as I used to.
Well, this one describes a 7-year famine. Imagine that. So let me read to you what it says. All right, so the famine still is what it's called. It's on Sahel Island in Egypt. It tells of a 7-year famine in Egypt that matches the famine we find in Genesis 41:30. This famine happened in the reign of Pharaoh Djoser. He's connected to the step pyramid. Djoser's vizier Imhotep is credited with saving Egypt. Amazingly, it not only tells of the 7 years of famine, but also describes the dream of Pharaoh. Storing grain in granaries and tax implemented. There's also similarities between the famine still and the biblical account. So this is what it says. I was in mourning on my throne. This is the Pharaoh's point of view. Those of the palace were in grief. My heart was in great affliction because Hapi, the river god, had failed to come in a time and a period of 7 years. Grain was scant. Kernels were dried up. Scarce was every kind of food. Every man robbed his twin. Those who entered did not go. Children cried, youngsters fell. The hearts of the old were grieving. Legs were drawn up. They hugged the ground, their arms clasped about them. Courtiers were needy, temples were shut, shrines were covered with dust, and everyone was in distress. All right, so then it says the starting inscription on the famine stele talks about the great distress and the great throne. And then in Genesis, in 41:8, it says, and it came to pass in the morning, his spirit was troubled, talking about the Pharaoh. The famine still inscribes that the Pharaoh is troubled about famine and asks Imhotep, ask Imhotep who the god of the Nile is so he can approach him about the drought. This is quote, I asked him who was the chamberlain Imhotep, the son of Ptah. What is the birthplace of the Nile? Who is the god there? Who is the god? And Imhotep answers, I need the guidance of him who presides over the fowling net. In Genesis 41:6, it says, and Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, it is not in me. God shall give Pharaoh an answer of peace. All right, so the similarities between Imhotep, the name found on the famine stele, and Joseph, it says, are striking. And you're thinking, no, it's not. But listen, just stay with me. The famine stele refers to Imhotep, the son of Ptah. Ptah was the Egyptian creator god. So think of all of these false gods, and Joseph comes up. How would you think of his god? It's not the water god. It's not the god of the wheat or the frogs or whatever. Is he creator? Yeah, so creator God, that would make sense if they, see him as that. Could this refer to Joseph as Imhotep, as the son of the creator? That is a question. I'm not telling you that that's what it is. I'm giving it to you so you can process it yourself. It says, there are many similarities between the two, but a few of the most notable were that both were a vizier, that means second in command of Egypt. They saved Egypt from 7 years of famine. Both were known architects, and there has been no mummy ever discovered of Imhotep, for as high-ranking as he was. And we know that when the Israelites left Egypt, what did they do with Joseph? They took him with them. All right? So the famine stele not only tells of 7 years of famine, but also describes a dream of the Pharaoh storing grain in granaries, and the tax implemented similar to the biblical account. So again, there's a lot there. I can't read it all.
So that is still there?
It is still there today. Yes.
I'd love to see that.
Me too.
And the thing is it's not just one proof. You've got the canal, you've got the granaries, you've got proof of the 7 years of famine. It's telling you who the Pharaoh was. It's telling you who the vizier was. This is like specific information. And when you start going back and you start doing a chronology to place, okay, well, what kingdom is this in? Who's the Pharaoh? Does it match up with the timeline of the Bible? It does. It does. And so if this matches, that's amazing in itself. But when you get over into the Exodus, there's so much more. So it just expounds on this little bit. It's all amazing that it's still there, even to this day. Go back and show you the waterway again. It looks like a movie set, doesn't it? All right, that's all I got. Y'all got questions? Comments?
I'd like to be in a little boat paddling through there. It's not a question, but
it's neat. It's neat.
So you're saying that and some of the granaries are still there?
Yes. Yes, those are the pictures of the actual granaries. I guess they have to uncover the sand. A lot of that was covered over, I guess, up until the late 1800s where they started. You remember the wasn't it the Sphinx? It was just the head was visible, and they had to move all that sand to get down to the body and stuff. So you start studying Egyptology. It's neat and everything. I can't wait to show y'all the proof of Moses. I wish I could just show you everything in one. And I'm trying to go by the lesson where these are the scripture and these are the evidences with this one, because I really want to keep going.
It's very interesting.
Yeah. It is, but you need to see it. You need to see that it matches up